Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker. I move that the Migration Amendment Repeal of Certain Visa Classes Regulation 2014, made under subsection 504(1) of the Migration Act of 1958 on the 29th of May 2014 and presented to the House on the 2nd of June 2014 be disallowed. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, Australia's migration program has always reflected the values of a diverse, multicultural society. We owe a great deal to our migration program in shaping the country we have become today. Equality, respect and understanding are all values which speak to modern Australia. Sadly, they are not the values that are upheld by this government. This government does not believe in respect. This government does not believe in equality. And through the Migration Amendment, Repeal of Certain Visa Classes Regulation of 2014, this government fails to value the contribution of our multicultural communities. This decision by the Abbott government to axe the non-contributory and other family visa categories shows a reckless disregard for our multicultural communities and quite clearly exposes the twisted priorities of this cruel government. Visas that will go under this regulation, if it is allowed to stand, include the parent visa, subclass 103, the aged parent visa, subclass 804, the age-dependent relative visas, subclasses 114 and 838, the remaining relative visas, subclasses 115 and 835, and the carer visas, subclasses 116 and 836. The government made these changes under the cover of darkness. Although the changes appeared in the budget papers, it seems even the minister's department were in the dark when it came to its implementation. When asked during the Senate budget estimates on 27 May when these changes would take effect, the minister's department meekly answered that they were not sure. Yet miraculously, a mere week after these comments were made, the Migration Amendment, Repeal of Certain Visa Classes Regulation, was tabled in the House of Representatives on the 2nd of June. The minister tried to sneak through the repeal of these visa classes, which will hit low and middle-income earners in multicultural communities, and it will hit them hard. This is a minister who has form when it comes to operating under a thick fog of secrecy. It clearly suits this minister's political objectives to keep the Australian people in the dark about his actions. And when we see the cruel impact of a decision by the Abbott government such as this, we know why. It is time that this minister was upfront with the Australian community about his cuts to the visa program. There was no warning, there was no consultation, no one knew that this was coming. In fact, it appears even the minister himself is confused by the changes. When Labor asked the Prime Minister in question time on 24 June about why the government is abolishing the carer visa, the minister answered on his behalf, and I quote, "Current claims for a number of family visas have been suspended until we can work through the backlog." So if these visa classes have only been suspended, why is this government seeking to repeal them by way of this regulation? It is clear that this minister has no regard for anything outside the border protection part of his portfolio. He loves his slogans so much he has now decided to turn his focus on stopping the parents. Why does the minister so badly want to stop the parents? In his response to the same question, the minister repeatedly talked about a backlog of claims. While it's true the popularity of the program led to increased waiting times, the minister's assertion that the government would, and I quote, start to work through a backlog of claims is simply disingenuous. This is demonstrated by the government's own budget papers and was even confirmed during Senate estimates when the department was asked about the migration program allocations for the 2014-15 financial year. Like so many other parts of this minister's portfolio, it would seem his command of the detail around this policy area is in a shambles as well. In fact, the government have reduced the allocation of non-contributory parent visas by 750 places. Likewise, the government have reduced the allocation for the other family category, which is also being abolished by this regulation, with 85 less places in the 2013-14 financial year. While these numbers may seem small to some, there is no doubt it will have a severe impact on those who are affected by it. Anyone who had been hoping to lodge an application for any of these visa classes will now be faced with the ultimate decision of having to abandon hopes of being permanently reunited with loved ones unless they can afford to pay up to a reported $120,000. And apparently the minister doesn't have a problem with this. In fact, he seems proud of the fact that he is deliberately hurting low and middle-income earners. Why is this minister punishing families that have given so much to this country? Why is this minister punishing families that have worked so hard and given so much to build a life in Australia? Why is this government persisting with a mean-spirited attack on a program that allows families to be reunited with overseas relatives, often elderly parents? Taking the axe to the non-contributory parent visa is a cruel and a heartless attack on our ethnic communities. For tens of thousands of ethnic families spread across our country, including in my own electorate of Corio, their hope of being reunited with family will be slammed shut, unless, of course, they can afford to fork out more than $100,000. One of the main concerns those families that would be affected by this abolition of the parent visa have expressed to me is a feeling of genuine shock and despair as to why the Abbott government would close the door on any hope they have of a reunion with family members. For many in our ethnic communities, there is a strong culture and a deep tradition in caring for the elderly. Taking in elderly relatives when they can no longer care for themselves is an ingrained cultural tradition that comes from a place of deep respect. Under this government, there seems to be no room for these values of caring and compassion. This mean-spirited attack on our ethnic communities says volumes about the cruel and twisted priorities of this minister and the Abbott government. Why is this government turning its back on migrants who have given so much to Australia? Today, Labor puts on the record its absolute opposition to the Abbott government's assault on our ethnic communities. Today, Labor puts on record its absolute opposition to the Abbott government's mean-spirited attack on all those families that have worked so hard to make Australia the wonderful place it is today by cruelly denying them of being able to share this country with their families. When I asked the Prime Minister in question time on 24 June why his government was punishing low and middle-income Australian families, the minister shamelessly responded, and I quote, "Under our migration program, we invite people into the country who are able to come and to pay their way." The arrogance and the insensitivity from this minister, and indeed from this government he represents, is quite simply breathtaking. And I'm sure there are members of the government who represent culturally and linguistically diverse electorates who are indeed fearful of the impact the repeal of these visas will have on their future tenure in this place. Labor is extending to you an opportunity to stand up for your electorates and show that you will not allow this minister to summarily dismiss the needs of your communities. The Parent Subclass 103 visa is a permanent visa for people who have children who are Australian citizens, permanent residents or eligible New Zealand citizens who have settled in this country. This visa requires a sponsor, usually the child or their spouse, and must have lived here lawfully for at least 2 years before the application is made. Applicants have to meet the balance of family test, and an assurance of support is also required. Despite the waiting periods, demand in the non-contributory parent category actually increased by more than 50% between 2011-12 and 2012-13. People do understand that they have to wait longer if they pay less, but waiting times ought not to be the indication of the success of a program, and it is certainly no answer to simply abolish them either. So let history show today as the day this government, on a mean-spirited crusade led by the Prime Minister and this minister, abandoned our ethnic families and our ethnic communities. Let history show today as the day this government cut ethnic communities loose, and that any hope of a family reunion is now out of reach for all but those with the means to pay more than $100,000. This is a breathtaking betrayal from those opposite. You can cast aside all the chest beating, all the bluff and all the bluster, and what you are left with is a cruel and heartless government that has today callously closed the door on family visas and, in doing so, slammed the door shut on many families ever being able to look after their loved ones in this country. So today, Labor stands for all ethnic families around Australia, and today those opposite have betrayed them, and that, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, is a disgrace. Yeah.